Incredible moment revealed. Janitor's unexpected fix transforms CEO's harsh words into awe. Frank's heart sank as Claire's voice sliced through the meeting room like a guillotine. Campus services? Worthless. They should be cut, she had said, her piercing gaze surveying the weary faces of the staff. His hands, rough and callous from years of labor, trembled as he clenched the edges of the table. The truth in her words stung. He had been unseen once more. Just the janitor in the shadows, a role he embraced yet resented. How could she dismiss everything he worked for? With each dismissive word, Frank's mind raced. Did she see the untold hours he spent ensuring students had a safe, clean environment? Did she know how many young lives he had guided through a simple conversation while mopping the floors? His dignity collided with the harsh reality of job insecurity. What if he stood up? What kind of danger would that bring? As the meeting ended, unease clung to him like a second skin. The halls, bustling with students lost in their own worlds, echoed fragments of laughter and chatter. But for Frank, isolation settled in like an unwelcome friend. He needed this job needed to support his children after his wife's death. They depended on him, and so did the comforting routine of cleaning these halls each night, a sanctuary from a world that felt increasingly hostile. But what was the cost of that dependency? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let us continue. As twilight descended on the campus, a storm rolled in, dark and furious, a tempest that mirrored his unsettled heart. When the gales howled, sending branches crashing against the windows, Frank sensed chaos brewing. The lights flickered, then fell into darkness. He could feel the weight of despair pressing down on the university as students stumbled through the pitch-black corridors. Panic. The infrastructure lay damaged, facilities flooded, communications lost. With adrenaline surging, Frank's unease transformed into determination. His hands, though worn, held knowledge that others often forgot. He darted back to the utility room and began to work, piecing together a solution amid the chaos. Bolts of inspiration cut through his panic. He had rigged machines before. This was just another challenge, ongoing and necessary. The shadows were oppressive, but he remained resolute, sweat-dampened and focused. Unbeknownst to him, Claire stood at a distance, observing his every move. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a man wielding unexpected brilliance in the face of calamity. The storm outside raged, but within that dim light, Frank found clarity. A plan sparked and he raced against time, the echoes of doubt muted by the pulsing fire of resolve. As dawn broke, so too did the fragile recognition between them. What he would face once he emerged from the night's labor could redefine everything. Would Claire acknowledge his worth? Would her icy perspective melt in the radiance of his quiet triumph? The air buzzed thick with anticipation, and with each passing minute, the question loomed larger. Could he reclaim his dignity amidst the changes rocking both his world and the course of the university? The sun's first rays poured into the now quiet campus, illuminating the debris left in the wake of the storm. Frank, drenched in exhaustion yet electrified by a flicker of triumph, gathered the scattered tools he had utilized throughout the night. As he surveyed the hallways, the echoes of his efforts reverberated within him, the dim corners now brighter and safer, thanks to his unwavering determination. Yet, his heart raced with uncertainty. The realm of recognition he had stepped into carried with it the weight of expectations he had long evaded. His footsteps resounded against the freshly polished floors as he made his way to the break room. Inside, the few remnants of last night's chaos were fading. He could hear snippets of conversation permeating the air, faculty members discussing the logistical nightmare that had unfolded. At the end of the table, Claire's voice caught his attention, sharp and commanding. She seemed to be recalibrating the day, shifting from dismissive to admiring as she spoke of the students' resilience amidst the chaos. Frank paused, his breath hitching in his throat. The staff around her leaned in, captivated by her plans to leverage the university's resources towards an emergency fund. Was she truly acknowledging the strength found within the very services she had deemed worthless just days ago? He wrestled with the urge to interrupt. The temptation to confront her, to lay bare everything he had done and felt, loomed like a storm cloud over his thoughts. Instead, he opted for the shadows. The retreat seemed safe. After all, he was just the janitor. Maybe he would remain invisible, his efforts buried under the rubble of abandoned metal and wood. But as he poured himself a cup of coffee, something shifted. Frank recalled the way he felt after having cleared the flooded hallway, how potent that sense of mastery had been. Wasn't it time for him to carry that spark beyond his nighttime duties? In the stillness of that moment, an idea ignited. He could approach Claire, not as a subordinate but as a technician, a problem solver, someone who could contribute critically in a time of need. A voice, quiet yet persistent, echoed within him an acknowledgement of the skills he had harbored silently. The thought energized him, and he approached the break room door. Taking a breath, he pushed it open, stepping into the light of the room as attentively as he would onto a stage. Conversations paused. Claire turned her gaze away from the group. Her features momentarily registered surprise followed by intrigue. "Excuse me, Claire," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I wanted to talk about the storm. I think I have some ideas on how we can improve our emergency procedures." A quietness fell that felt heavy yet inviting. The room held its breath, waiting for her response. What he had taken for granted for so long swirled around him, the expectations pressing as tangible weight. Could he truly reclaim a piece of respect? Or would he fall back into the shadows of insignificance? "Frank." Claire's voice broke through the silence. "I'd like to hear what you have to say." A thrill darted through his veins. All those moments spent grappling with menial tasks, mopping spills, clearing away trash, had been building to this. He was no longer just a janitor, but a custodian of knowledge, a contributor to change. His journey from the shadows had begun. But then again, as adrenaline surged, nagging doubts crept in. Was he ready to step forward, to challenge the misconceptions that shadowed him? With the eyes of his peers upon him, the question hung like a comet poised to enter his orbit. Would his voice resonate, or would it dissipate into the void? Determined, he took a step closer to Claire and the group, ready to embrace the risk, poised for confrontation. His voice rang with newfound confidence. The time had come to face the truth about himself. Frank's heart raced as he stood at the precipice of his own rebirth, the air pregnant with anticipation. The eyes of his colleagues fixed on him, a kaleidoscope of curiosity and disbelief swirling in their gazes. This was no ordinary moment. It was a pivotal clash between perception and reality. He felt both exhilarated and terrified, like standing at the edge of an unexplored chasm. "Thank you, Claire," he acknowledged, feeling the weight of their stares. The last vestiges of his former self threatened to swallow him whole, the janitor who had spent years blending into the background, the forgotten laborer whose only aim was to go unnoticed. "I think we can reevaluate our emergency protocols by integrating more hands-on training with the staff. After all, they are the first responders in crises like last night." He heard himself speak, words spilling out with surprising clarity. This was not merely an opinion. It was a culmination of insights earned from countless night shifts, incidents, and a deep understanding of the campus infrastructure. Regaining his composure, Frank observed Claire's expression transform from surprise to contemplation, her brows slightly furrowing as she processed his suggestion. "Interesting," she replied, her tone betraying a hint of newfound respect. "What specifics do you have in mind?" This was the moment his heart urged him to rise amidst the shadows. Frank leaned into the unfolding situation. "We can set up a series of drills, led by a team of volunteers who know the layout and emergency exits deeply. Each department could train their members to manage specific types of crises. We need to empower everyone to feel capable, rather than relying solely on traditional emergency measures." Every word was another stone laid in the foundation of his argument, and he felt a pulse of solidarity erupt from within himself. His hands unconsciously moved, mimicking the motions of setting up barriers, directing foot traffic. Visualizing the chaos the night had wrought made the concepts flow more freely. Unfazed by the tremor in his voice, he pressed onward. "Additionally, we can develop a digital portal where staff and students can report hazards or issues in real time. It would encourage proactive involvement." A mixture of admiration and confusion flickered across the faces of his peers. Frank became aware of several whispers circulating around the room, some discreetly impressed, while others still clung to disbelief. Yet this was his moment. He continued, emboldened by his gradual metamorphosis. I've spent years here. I know every creak in the floors and the hidden issues buried under layers of neglect. It takes teamwork to keep things running smoothly. His gaze caught Claire's, and there was a brief, tangible connection that electrified him. She understood the depth of responsibility he was trying to communicate. Frank, she said, a hint of challenge in her voice, if you're serious about this, why not lead a workshop with the administration? Build a module based on your insights. The room collectively gasped, while exuberance tangled with trepidation coursed through Frank. The implications of her words turned his resolve into determination. He was being asked to step up rather than step back, confronted with a chance to lead when he had always held back. Absolutely, he replied, feeling the rush of purpose that had eluded him for too long. Let's turn last night's calamity into a catalyst for a more prepared community. As the conversation began to flourish around him, Frank felt an unfamiliar comfort settle in. Each suggestion he made seemed to strengthen his credibility, slowly dismantling the lingering fears of insignificance. The collective brainstorming revealed a depth of understanding about preparedness he hadn't known existed. But as an air of validation began to envelop him, another thought gnawed at the edges of his newfound confidence. Had he truly shaken off the identity of the unnoticed janitor? Or had he merely stumbled into the spotlight temporarily? The fear of returning to obscurity loomed large, a specter waiting to reclaim him. As the details of future steps emerged, he held onto a singular thought. He must ensure that this wasn't a fleeting moment of bravery, but a sustained journey into the light. With this realization dawning, questions began to weave through his mind. Was the risk of public scrutiny worth the rewards of individual growth? What if every shred of confidence he gained today unraveled tomorrow? With his fate intertwined with these new challenges, he stood ready, even as uncertainty whispered through the air, silently urging him to grapple with the unraveling truth of who he was becoming. What awaited him on the other side of this journey? The stakes beckoned him onward. Frank stood with a newfound sense of direction, poised between the shadow of his past and the bright promise of his future. The conference room buzzed as colleagues conferred about his suggestions, enthusiasm mingling with an undercurrent of skepticism. His heart raced, not just from recognition but from the fear that this moment of significance could slip through his fingers. As he leaned against the conference table, part of him wanted to fade back into the anonymity he had known so well. Yet the spark of possibility ignited by Claire's challenge flared brighter. He envisioned leading that workshop, his voice echoing off the walls as he shared insights forged from years of silent observation. The idea of drafting a module felt daunting, and yet exhilarating. It was a chance to break free from the chains of his past. After the meeting, whispers of admiration followed him down the hallway. Colleagues approached him with questions about his plans, offering snippets of support that only fueled the internal conflict raging within. Each compliment was a reminder of the old Frank, the one he feared had merely borrowed a moment of confidence rather than embodying lasting change. How did it feel up there? A young colleague asked, genuinely curious. You were amazing. Frank managed a hesitant smile, but inside doubts clawed at him. I've got a lot to figure out, he responded, evading the praise. The attention felt unnatural. He wasn't the celebrated leader. He was still the janitor who pushed a broom and quietly fixed leaks. When he returned to his maintenance closet, the familiarity of that space was a relief. The smell of cleaning agents mingled with dust, the chaos of wrangled tools providing comfort. Yet the invigorating potential of his ideas lingered in his mind, the workshop just a sketch on paper. How could he transform it into something meaningful? He settled heavily on a stool, pulling out a notepad. With each stroke of the pen, he outlined his ideas. Drills for emergencies, fostering proactive engagement, building a culture of safety. It felt concrete, real, but detached from the person he had always been. Was he even qualified to teach others when he had spent so long simply absorbing knowledge? The self-doubt crept back, whispering incessantly that maybe everyone had been mistaken about him. Suddenly, a knock on the door broke his thoughts. Claire peered in, her expression serious yet inviting. Got a second? She asked. Frank nodded, his pulse quickening as she entered. I think you have some great ideas that need to be put into action, but it's not just about theory. You need to connect with the staff beyond the workshop. Encourage them to invest in this, to feel part of it. Can you facilitate discussions, maybe something informal to start? Her words struck him with clarity. It wasn't just about directives but building a rapport. This was his chance to cultivate trust and camaraderie. Not only face the potential for failure, but embrace a new version of himself. I'd love to, Frank replied, the spark of ambition reigniting. Good, she smiled, let us open up that dialogue. As she left, a wave of warmth washed over him. If he could make that personal connection, the internal shift would resonate outward. He began sketching plans for informal meetings, ways to involve others in the safety protocol discussion, small steps that could lead to meaningful change. Yet, deep within him, another question lingered. What would happen when he had to confront their reactions? Would they rally around his vision, or would they retreat behind the fears of making mistakes? The echoes of that potential criticism sent a shiver down his spine. Despite the uncertainty, he felt propelled into uncharted territory, a place where growth thrived under pressure. He began to finalize his thoughts when he experienced a minor revelation. He could embrace both his past and this evolving new identity, recognizing the value of humility even as he took steps forward. As the day closed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank stood before the mirror in the staff lounge. For the first time, he questioned not just who he was but who he could become. The story of his rebirth was still unfolding, much like the work he intended to undertake with his peers. But lingering doubts haunted him. What if he fell short? What if the facade crumbled? Would he be equipped to handle the fallout? Just as he gathered the loose threads of his plans, a calm resolve settled in. He was ready to challenge himself and face whatever came next. As he turned to leave, the lingering uncertainties wrapped around him like fog. Could he truly step beyond the boundaries of self-doubt and contribute something significant? Or would fear tether him back to the obscurity he had fought so hard to escape? As the following weeks unfolded, Frank immersed himself in the process of preparing for those informal discussions Claire had suggested. He drafted concise outlines and structured sessions. Each element felt like a building block, slowly constructing a bridge from his past self to the emerging leader he aspired to be. Yet, every time he opened his laptop, the blinking cursor mocked him, a constant reminder of the uncertainty that tinged his newfound ambition. The first session approached like a storm cloud on the horizon, looming and ominous. Frank could feel the weight of anticipation in the air. Would anyone show up? Would they actually engage, or would his efforts fall flat, dismissed as naive attempts at change? He found himself rehearsing his opening lines in the flickering light of the maintenance room, a tangle of anxiety and excitement coiling in his stomach. When the day arrived, he lined the break room with chairs, carefully adjusting each one until they were perfectly aligned. It was a small act of control amidst the turmoil whirling in his mind. When the clock struck noon, he took a deep breath and prepared to welcome his colleagues not as a janitor, but as a potential facilitator. To his surprise, a modest group gathered. A couple of willing participants, curious enough, and a few who had come to support their peer. At that moment, the room felt charged with potential, but Frank's heart raced with doubts. As he stepped forward, the eyes of his colleagues were both encouraging and intimidating. "Thanks for coming," he began, his voice steadying from the intentionality of his intent. He shared his vision for improving safety protocols not as edicts from on high, but as collaborative conversations. He felt them lean in closer, responding to his eagerness with curiosity. They began sharing their own experiences, and with every story Frank found his footing. However, mid-discussion, a sharp voice cut through the camaraderie. "You think we'll actually change anything?" It was Greg, a senior technician known for his bluntness, skepticism simmering beneath every word. "What do you know about keeping us safe? You're just a janitor." Frank's stomach dropped, but instead of retreating behind his discomfort, a fire ignited within him. The years spent absorbing knowledge were now an arsenal ready for deployment. "I may not have your experience," he replied, meeting Greg's gaze, "but my background gives me a unique perspective. I've seen where things go wrong, and I know we can do better together. This isn't just about change, it's about collaboration. What do you guys think?" The silence that followed felt like an eternity, but then, surprisingly, a few heads nodded. Slowly, the conversations resumed, and different perspectives emerged. Each contribution, whether from doubt or support, was a lesson in disguise. Frank experienced a revelation. They weren't just challenging him. They were wrestling with their own fear of vulnerability and failure. After the meeting, he walked away invigorated, buoyed by the connections he'd made and the groundwork laid. There had been difficulties, but they felt surmountable now. He realized he had not only facilitated a discussion but also challenged himself to confront the very doubt Greg had held up before him. Yet, as he reflected, it became clear that his journey was just beginning. What if, in embracing his role, he faced a backlash from colleagues severely resistant to change? What if the workshop he envisioned faltered before it could flourish? The stakes were rising, and the uncertainty loomed ahead like dark clouds ready to unleash a storm. But regardless of the fear that lingered, Frank was resolute. He was ready to embrace whatever came next. The true test was just a conversation away. Days turned into weeks, and Frank's determination to foster change was not dimmed by early doubts. Each subsequent session he led gained traction, slowly building a larger group of willing participants. There was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, tension dissipating as he crafted a space for open dialogue. Participants who had initially been skeptics emerged more engaged each week, and even Greg's criticisms had softened somewhat, giving way to more constructive feedback. But with this curiosity came an unsettling realization. Not everyone was on board. A group of senior technicians, the very ones whose expertise Frank needed to implement his ideas, began to distance themselves from these discussions. Their dismissive side glances and hushed whispers felt like small blades, pricking at Frank's growing confidence. It wasn't he just Greg anymore. There was a faction looming, ready to undermine his efforts. One afternoon, after a particularly fruitful meeting, Frank found himself alone in the break room, staring at the remnants of a half-empty coffee pot. His thoughts churned. Was he naive to believe he could represent the voices of those who felt unheard? Was he venturing into a territory that was better left untouched? The flicker of doubt he thought he had extinguished bloomed back to life, whispering that the path to leadership might be fraught with more obstacles than he was equipped to handle. As he prepared for the next session, anxiety twisted in his stomach. He knew he needed to address the quiet resistance but hesitated. Could he confront the group in a way that didn't create further division? Would his attempts to draw out those who were reluctant ignite confrontation rather than conversation? He weighed his options, cycling through strategies while pacing his small living room, the tension dancing between caution and conviction. The next session began with an edge of anticipation. Frank stood in front of a packed room, the energy palpable, but he could feel the naysayers lurking in the back. As the discussion kicked off, he called out to the group, addressing the elephant in the room. "I know this hasn't been easy for everyone," he began, trying to maintain an even tone. "But if we want to implement real change, it's crucial we address the worries directly. I want to hear your concerns. Let us make today about what's holding us back." As he opened the floor, unscripted responses poured forth. A technician named Lisa pointed out safety measures that hadn't improved in years, while another, Tony, shared a dire incident from his past, revealing the personal stake in their safety protocols. Each voice added depth to the discussion, and as Frank facilitated these raw exchanges, he felt a sense of connection. The walls began to fall. But surprise struck when Greg finally spoke up. A tone of frustration layered in his words. "We all want to feel safe, but change can feel like a burden. It's not just about your ideas, Frank. It's about figuring out what we can actually pull off together before we dive into something that falls flat." Frank felt the weight of Greg's challenge. It was profound, forcing him to reassess his approach. Was he at risk of pushing too hard without understanding the capabilities of the team? He could feel the heat of their scrutiny, a test of his leadership standing right there. As the room held its breath, Frank recognized this was the moment he'd been preparing for, and he had to rise to the occasion. "Let us outline the changes we can realistically implement," he replied, determined to navigate this backlash with clarity, rather than retreat. What's manageable? What will truly enhance safety without overwhelming anyone? In that instant, he wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a leader encouraging co-creation and consensus. For the first time, Frank felt worthy of the space he occupied. Yet, as the meeting drawn to a close, a pit began to form in his stomach again, reminding him of the resistance yet to be addressed. He felt a deepening resolve, knowing there were still those who wouldn't meet him. Halfway, could he convince the skeptics enough to sway the tide? Or would this newfound momentum fall apart at the first sign of true resistance? The tension was just beginning to build, and with it the stakes only grew higher. The following week, Frank entered the meeting room with renewed determination. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of impending challenge. The murmurings of discontent from the senior technicians echoed in his mind. He understood too well that today's session would be a pivotal moment, a test of his ability to hold the group together or risk fracturing the fragile alliance he had begun to build. Gazing around the room, he sensed the murmurs before they surfaced, each side glancing at one another. Some wore skeptical expressions, arms crossed tightly over their chests. Others, including Lisa and Tony, seemed to be waiting with bated breath for Frank's next move. He had to address the tension head-on but without igniting the fires of dissent. "Thank you all for joining," he began, his voice steady yet imbued with urgency. "There's an energy in this room that tells me we can push the boundaries of what we thought was possible." He leaned in slightly, lowering his tone. "But I also see the guarded faces. Let us not skate over what needs addressing. I'm here to lead this conversation, but I can't do it alone." Greg's gaze locked onto Frank, his brow knotted. "It's one thing to talk about potential, Frank," he said coolly, "but what about the realities? Are we ready for the work required after we identify these issues?" Unnerved, Frank took a deep breath. Greg's pointedness had a knack for cutting through the noise, and it forced a reckoning within him. Was he ready to look beyond brainstorming and commit to the hard graft that followed? What if the issues turned out to be beyond what he imagined? The room felt heavy, as if everyone could sense the stakes rising. "Let us dissect those real hurdles," Frank replied, channeling the tension into constructive action. "If we can surface our concerns, we can start charting a path forward. I want to create an actionable plan, not just point out gaps." He scanned the room, searching for encouragement, but finding more of the same guarded expressions. "Fine," Greg replied, leaning back slightly and glancing around the room. "Let us say we identify our main issue: safety procedures. What happens next? Is there a real mechanism in place for change?" Frank glanced at the whiteboard, the blank space challenging him to fill it with clarity. "We assess what we can manage," he asserted, feeling heat in his cheeks as he grappled with self-doubt. "We set a timeline, establish smaller working groups, and delegate responsibilities based on strengths." The discussion unfolded slowly, yet Frank carefully felt the undercurrents of resistance. While some of the technicians started offering insight, others remained stubbornly quiet, retreating into their skepticism. Each word he spoke poured anxiety into his gut, drawing him to question whether he could engage the doubters. As the conversation progressed, Frank felt a hidden well of frustration rising within him. He had dedicated weeks to creating an environment for collaboration, yet it felt like the very fabric was tearing at its seams. Perhaps it was not just his approach that was flawed, but his expectation that every voice would easily participate. He shifted gears, his tone firm but compassionate. "I know change is daunting and each of us has our fears. But if we stay silent, we might miss the opportunity to improve our environment and safety measures. I'm asking for honest engagement." The room held a collective breath, and a whisper of hope rustled through the assembly. Frank felt something shift. Tony interjected, his voice tentative but daring. "You're right, Frank. We can be afraid, but we also know this isn't just about us. It's about creating a safer place for everyone." He hesitated. "Count me in." With each word, Frank's heart pounded with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Yet, amidst this flicker of encouragement, the lingering shadows of doubt still loomed large. There remained a faction bound by skepticism that needed to be addressed. What would it take to turn their silence into support? As the meeting wound down, Frank sensed the urgency growing. He wasn't just on the precipice of change. He was standing at the edge of a chasm, with a bridge yet to be built. Could he summon the courage to confront the skeptics directly and lead them across, or was the gap too wide? This was only the beginning of an unfolding struggle that was taking shape right before him. Frank stood before the whiteboard, now scrawled with the beginnings of a framework for their action plan. The residue of doubt clung to him like a heavy fog, yet he felt a flicker of resolve energizing his thoughts. Would addressing the skeptics require more than a strategic plan? Perhaps it would take a deeply personal connection, a show of vulnerability to earn their trust. He caught Greg's wary eyes again. The man had become a crucial pivot point in the room, a barometer for dissent. Frank could sense that he needed to engage with Greg directly, to know whether the man's skepticism stemmed from a place of genuine concern or something deeper. But how to bridge that chasm? Greg, Frank began, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath. Let's talk specifics. What worried you most about the proposed safety protocols? Can you share that with us? The room shifted inward slightly, all eyes turning to Greg. For a moment time seemed suspended, the tension felt almost palpable. Then Greg sat a little straighter, his arms uncrossing as he leaned forward. It's not just the protocols, Frank. It's about accountability. We've seen plans come and go and nothing changes. Frank recognized the challenge embedded in those words. On the surface, Greg's concerns might appear simply logistical, but there was something deeper at play, a fear of futility, perhaps rooted in past experiences. Frank had a choice: to offer a static solution that might only placate, or to invite a dialogue that could transform the conversation. You're right, Greg. Each plan we create must be underpinned by accountability. It's not just about writing words on paper. It's about tangible outcomes. He felt a sense of purpose settle in his chest. How about we set a review period? A time when we'll gather to assess the impacts and adapt as necessary? Your expertise can shape that process. The vulnerability in Frank's proposition rippled through the group. His openness allowed for the shift from a traditional hierarchy to a collaborative endeavor. Suddenly, Greg appeared less the antagonist and more of a partner in the solution. Lisa chimed in. I like that approach, Frank. We need to own our part in this. For the first time, Frank felt the walls begin to crack. It was a small victory, yet it was precisely what he needed to cling to. Gradually, technicians started exchanging glances. The atmosphere lightened, a slow thaw against a pervasive chill. As the meeting progressed, Frank began to feel the pulse of collective energy anchoring him. It wasn't merely his voice anyone relied upon. It was the gathering of their insights, an amalgamation of their strengths. The fear of silence was being replaced by the weight of shared responsibility. They began delineating specific roles based on their competencies, discussing who would lead which small group. Yet, even amid this burgeoning hope, unease whispered in the recesses of his mind. Would it hold? Was he really capable of engaging the last holdouts, the ones still seated in quiet skepticism? With the meeting drawing to a close, Frank stood before them, once more facing the familiar sweep of doubt overtaking his thoughts. Thank you for sharing today. But we're not done yet. I still need to hear from all of you, even those of you who are hesitant to speak. I can't close the door on doubt. We need those critical perspectives if we're truly going to succeed. An electric silence fell around the room. Frank's pulse quickened as he sensed the weight of their scrutiny. Deep down, did he truly believe he could galvanize those who remained unconvinced? He had opened a door, but he needed to be prepared to step through it, to confront the hard truths of his leadership journey, a journey still fraught with uncertainty. Would he be able to engage directly with the skeptics who hid in the shadows? The moment of truth loomed just beyond the horizon. The question sank into him: could he summon the courage to forcefully meet this challenge and emerge renewed? Or would he find himself swallowed by the abyss he had evoked? Frank's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of anticipation filled the air. He stood at the precipice of a critical moment. The skepticism that lingered in the room felt tangible. Frank needed to transform this tension into a constructive dialogue. But doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Would they remain silent? Or could he coax out their true feelings? Thank you again for your insights today, he began, trying to project confidence. But I want to encourage those of you who may still feel hesitant to speak up. I recognize there is a history here of plans being made and never followed through. So let us not dance around it. I want to hear your criticisms, your reservations. The room remained silent, the collective breath held tight under the weight of expectation. Frank's eyes flitted between his colleagues, landing once more on Greg, who wore a frown that hinted at deeper concerns. Frank felt a pull, a need to connect directly with him. Greg, if you don't mind, can you elaborate on your concerns? Your experience could help frame our path forward. The shift in dynamics was palpable. A spark flickered in Greg's eyes, a hint of being heard after too long in the shadows. It's not just about what's on paper, he replied slowly, carefully constructing his thoughts. It's about believing the changes will make a real difference. I have seen people lose faith, and that can poison everything. Frank nodded, understanding the gravity of Greg's words. It wasn't simply the plan he needed to sell, but the belief behind it. Inspired, he leaned in, sensing the urgency. What do you think could help us regain that faith? If there's anything I've learned, it's that together we can shift narratives. We need to be proactive in addressing this issue, not just reactive. Greg hesitated, his skepticism conflicting with a budding curiosity. If we could involve everyone in periodic assessments, maybe that could be a start. People need to know their voices are part of the journey. That's a solid idea, Greg, Frank replied, his adrenaline surging as he recognized this as an opportunity. When we create an open channel for feedback, it fosters that very accountability and trust we're lacking. Should we establish a steering committee that regularly shares updates and receives feedback? Frank felt a wave of support as murmurs of agreement began circulating among the others. They were beginning to lean into the frame he was building, and for a moment, it felt as though they were teetering on the edge of transformation. Lisa spoke again, enthusiasm bringing her voice to life. We could even rotate leadership roles within the committee. Everyone should have a voice and role in this. We can't have more of the same. Absolutely. Everybody has strengths they can bring. Frank anchored his thoughts to this new collective vision. But let us make this tangible. How often should we meet? What structures can we put in place to ensure this accountability isn't just spoken? A burst of dialogue erupted, with technicians and managers brainstorming on how to carry this newfound momentum forward. It was exhilarating, yet within it, Frank felt an undercurrent of nervousness. Would he be able to maintain this enthusiasm once the meeting's afterglow faded? As they gathered their ideas, Frank's mind raced with the realization of the weight of his own accountability now intertwined with theirs. He was not merely an organizational leader but a digital custodian of trust, and that trust demanded he hold himself to a higher standard. Yet, the core anxiety still rested in his mind, the remaining skeptics who hadn't fully emerged from the shadows. Would their doubts falter in the face of this collaboration? Frank took a deep breath, resolved to meet them head-on. Before we wrap up, I want to make a point of reiterating how critical it is that we confront any remaining skepticism together. Let us set up smaller groups for those who wish to discuss their concerns outside this setting. I believe we can change the narrative, but it starts with opening the curtains on our fears. The reactions varied, a mix of fear and budding hope. Yet Frank could feel the shift, the collective energy brewing with potential. As the meeting concluded, however, one question loomed above the rest, each beat almost deafening: was he truly equipped to bear that responsibility? Leadership, he understood, meant more than just guiding from the front. It was about being willing to stand beside others in their struggles, taking on the weight of their fears. With the discussions fresh in his mind and the promise of collaboration ring in his ears, Frank wondered if this was merely the first step on a much broader journey. As he exited the room, his heart raced not just with anticipation, but with the inkling of a deeper reckoning to come, an unexpected challenge that lingered just under the surface, waiting to be uncovered. He had opened a door, but what awaited him on the other side could upend everything he believed about himself and leadership. Weeks later, Frank stood in front of a full meeting room, a surge of confidence emanating from him. Each face reflected curiosity and engagement, a stark contrast from the initial skepticism that had hung heavily in the air not so long ago. He had taken their collective voices and transformed them into a structured plan, a potent synthesis of ideas that mattered. Today, they would finalize the action steps from their discussions, setting the course for safety preparedness at the university. As he flipped through the presentation slides, memories of the doubts he'd faced swirled in his thoughts. Just months earlier, he had been viewed as the janitor. Now he was a recognized contributor and leader. Greg, who had been one of his staunchest critics, sat in the front row, nodding to every point Frank made. This unity epitomized the transformation not just for Frank, but for the entire team. Thanks to the input we gathered, we're ready to launch our first safety drills, Frank announced, the words rolling off his tongue with fluidity. We've broken down our approach into manageable tasks, allowing every department to engage meaningfully in the execution of these protocols. Those around him percolated with enthusiasm, their earlier uncertainties melting away in the warmth of consensus. As the meeting progressed, Frank recalled specifics from various sessions. Moments when he had felt exposed, hungry for acknowledgement, began to crystallize into forged connections. He remembered Greg's challenge about accountability, each suggestion prompting Frank to dig deeper, to show vulnerability not just in sharing knowledge, but in admitting that the burden of success weighed heavily on him too. With each detail he shared, Frank could feel the pulse of the group aligning with his vision. They were no longer singular voices siloed in skepticism. Instead, they were a collective force ready to bring positive change. Yet, in this exhilarating crescendo, he understood that leadership was about building relationships even with those who remained hesitant. The next step isn't simply executing plans. It's about creating an environment of empowerment, Frank continued, drawing focus back to the group. We need to cultivate an inclusive culture, one that welcomes feedback and demonstrates accountability at every level. We are in this together. A spontaneous round of applause erupted, not just for the plans being implemented, but for the shared journey they had embarked upon. In that moment, Frank felt acutely aware of his evolution. He had conquered his own fears and transformed his role from invisible worker to a driving force for change. The eyes that had once overlooked him were now recognizing his contributions. As the meeting concluded, the energy in the room crackled with excitement. What had once felt like unattainable dreams were now tangible realities born from collaboration and resilience. Frank stepped out into the busy hallway, heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. His children would see their father not just as a provider, but as a leader, a man who dared to push the envelope and advocate for change. Eventually, he would take this experience further, seeking collaborative opportunities on a larger scale, a chance to broaden his impact beyond the university. Frank had conquered the shadows of self-doubt and rewritten the narrative he had once believed about himself. He no longer felt invisible. He had established his place in the fabric of that community as a recognized and competent leader. Looking through the bustling crowd of students, faculty, and staff, he stood confident, equipped to face any challenges that awaited him on the horizon. This wasn't merely a new role. It was an affirmation of who he had always been, a custodian of potential both for himself and others. The call for urgency now flickered within him, as he realized this moment could spark an expansive change. This was just the beginning. With every step he took, he felt empowered and ready for more than he had ever thought possible. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It's essential to keep these powerful stories alive. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Your thoughts matter. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to spread awareness of this inspiring journey. You need to support the channel today.